Okay, so this one's kind of a follow-up to my last video, and it's certainly related to it. I was talking about Dr. Lawrence Newport, whom I don't know well, but what I do know of him, I have a lot of respect for the guy for his role in the Bully XL ban, and now he's focusing on the issue of career criminals. In the last video, I negated to mention some other statistics, which I really should have done, which is actual verifiable cases where this works. This is a positive thing, often when it comes to crime, it can be thoroughly depressing and it can be difficult to find any glimmer of hope. But these statistics are very welcome, and they show that what Dr. Newport is proposing does work. So, which are these statistics? Hemel Hempstead, crime dropped 72% by focusing on career criminals. I guess that would be Hertfordshire Police. By focusing on career criminals, crime dropped 72% in Hemel Hempstead. In Barnsley, burglaries dropped 64% because just 7 hardcore burglars were arrested and got custodial sentences, I assume. In the City of London, and this is incredible, bike theft dropped 90%. 90%, that's an incredibly positive rate. Again, um, because a handful of bike thieves were imprisoned. It works. It works. So it's infuriating that this isn't used more. It works. Um, but what I want to focus on more on this video is Labour's mixed messages on crime. Now, the Prime Minister was speaking to BBC Radio Bristol, and this is also on X and it's in other sources. And he was talking about what the Home Secretary is proposing, respect orders. It sounds very similar to ASBOs, which had very mixed successes in the Blair years. But, one of the criticisms of ASBOs was that young offenders, for example, wore them as a badge of honour. There is a risk that the same thing will happen with respect orders. I mean, the things Starmer was talking about are very similar to the things that people would have ASBOs on them for. For example, obnoxious drinking in public areas, going up and down on electric scooters at night time, which is a serious problem in many parts of the country. Um, it's good that there'll be more of a focus on that. And it's also good that the Prime Minister recognises that antisocial behaviour is a real problem. It blights people's lives. He said that, sometimes people say to me it's low level crime. I totally don't accept that. So I'm pleased that Starmer understands that. I'm pleased that he gets it. But he said, they'll then be brought before court. But again, if you get some of those involved in antisocial behaviour who are career criminals, going before a court is meaningless unless they're sent to jail. So this all ties in, right? Um, I honestly don't know what to make of Labour on crime. Because the record so far is very mixed. They're sending out mixed messages. The Prime Minister obviously understands that people care about antisocial behaviour. I welcome that. I welcome the fact that violent rioters faced custodial sentences over the summer. I think that was absolutely justified. I welcome that. Um, but then you consider, I don't want to just repeat myself, but Lord Timpson's attitude to punishment, the fact that he thinks of two-thirds of inmates shouldn't be in prison. This is the prisons minister. Some of the things he proposes are reasonable. I do have a big problem with Timpson's attitude to judicial punishment. And again, I would ask Lord Timpson if I had the opportunity, well, how does your attitude to punishment reconcile with the fact that career criminals routinely avoid prison? And we know that if they're put in prison, it reduces crime rates. So he's talking about keeping the public safe. Well, if he really means that, then he should take this seriously. So should the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. Another thing that it would be remiss of me not to mention this, the usage of non-crime hate incidents by police um, concern a lot of people. Now, I read a piece in the Eye where Simon Kellner was justifying this. He was saying that the Alison Pearson story, which I touched on in a previous video, this is the Daily Telegraph journalist who had police visiting her home. He said, well, the context there was that she had defamed 2 men in a picture, accusing them of being pro-Palestinians when they were actually Pakistanis. But Kellner was ignoring a lot of the context as well. He was ignoring the fact, for example, of the double standards of police being seen with one political group but refusing to be seen with another. Um, I think, Kellner would say, oh, it's a great sign of community cohesion. Well, the police should be non-partisan. So even something that might seem relatively innocent, it could ignite controversy. I mean, that sort of thing, for instance, could drive sectarian divides among the Pakistani community in Britain by posing with members of one political party or supporters of one political party over another. I think it was Greater Manchester Police. So Pearson had made mistakes in her tweet. She deleted it. But to have a police visit at home, um, Kellner was saying the police should do all these things. They should tackle burglaries, but also non-crime hate incidents. I think he's missing the point here, because if police resources are stretched, and they are, then they should be prioritising what the public really care about. And the vast majority of the public think that non-crime hate incidents are abused. Now, if you have someone defaming another person, that person has a right to defend themselves and even press legal action to them for defamation or something. I really, really feel uncomfortable with the way non-crime hate incidents are used. And the clue is in the name, non-crime. So if they're not a criminal offence, police have no business doing it. And frankly, this gives fuel to the likes of Elon Musk, who says that this is a police state. I think that's hyperbole. I don't think we are. But obviously, it's going to give fuel to people like Elon Musk to say that. Um, anyway, Labour's message on crime is just really mixed. I don't know what to think. It has to be said, a lot of this is going to be picking up from what the Tories failed to do. They've done a few good things. Like I said, under Dominic Raab, victims of crime got more say in parole hearings, and sentencing was made more transparent in courts of law. But for a party that prides itself on being, all about law and order, the Tories largely failed. We still saw far, far too many lenient sentences. Um, although there is another factor to all of this that has to be considered. Political parties, particularly during general elections, are populist. They're all populist, particularly Labour and the Tories, because they know. I mean, Labour was populist. They kept accusing Sunak of being soft on crime, and now they've suddenly got jittery in some of these areas. For example, they spoke about building new prison spaces, and now they're talking about punishing fewer people with custodial sentences. So it's a mixed message. That's not good. They need to be consistent. I'd almost prefer Labour was just soft on crime across the board, so at least we know where they truly lie. This lack of consistency is concerning, and I know you get different types of crime, but the messaging is inconsistent. My message to the Prime Minister and to Yvette Cooper: you're either tough on crime or you aren't. If you're pushing this tough on crime message, saying you're going to crack down on antisocial behaviour, great. But how does that then reconcile with releasing violent inmates early? And I know it was argued that some of these people, they weren't going to release sexual offenders. Um, but some of those people were dangerous criminals, and some of them did reoffend after they cracked open the champagne. Um, so Labour needs to do much, much better in terms of perception. And I just think it's mixed messages when you have a prisons minister saying we punish too many people, let's just focus on rehabilitation, whilst the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary are saying we're going to be tough on crime. Which is it? Those are contradictory messages. Um, I welcome what those places have done, the City of London, Barnsley, Hemel Hempstead. It may be replicated elsewhere, but clearly it isn't being used enough. So, Dr. Lawrence Newport, and again, please sign his petition if you can. It's quick, it's a secure site. I'll even put the link under this again. Please sign it. Because if people complain about crime and don't do anything about it, never sign petitions, never raise a voice, nothing's going to change. These things do work, and so they have to be utilized. This isn't about just locking people up and throwing away the key. It's about recognizing that prolific offenders account for a significant portion of the threat the public face. Lock them up, and it is proven to make the public safer. And the final point on the issue of crime, all this stuff is important. Final points, excuse me. I mentioned political parties are populist. Well, it's true, but there are limits on what political parties can do. There's also a lot of discretion in the judiciary, and any minister will say they can't interfere in the judicial process because it's independent. Fine, but there is a bit of a blame game here. The Ministry of Justice says the judiciary is independent. The judiciary will say, I'm talking about judges in the court of law, they'll say they're just following advice and guidelines and their hands are bound. That's not entirely true because actually judges have quite a bit of degree of flexibility with aggravating and mitigating factors. And then you get the Sentencing Council, which I've got little time for. They will claim that they're just an advisory board and they're just offering guidance. But they carry significant weight actually. They are the people setting out sentencing guidelines. So when politicians talk tough, they need to also be honest with the public and say, a lot of this is beyond my control. This is down to what judges decide. Politicians can make laws, but they've actually less influence on sentencing than the public think. It's the sentencing council and judges that largely decide that. Um, that has to change. I would argue that there should be more power for elected politicians to determine what sentencing should be. The sentencing council is unelected. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood here. I'm not saying that judges should necessarily be elected, but I do think there's a huge gulf between public opinion and the legal establishment. Not in every single case, but in too many cases. And the final point I'll make here is a more optimistic one, or it should be. It's not, as much as I get frustrated by this and depressed, I am fully aware that Britain is not the worst place in the world. It's not. There are far, far more dangerous countries in the UK. Britain is not Haiti. Britain is not El Salvador or Venezuela. Um, and we are actually tougher for those who are hardline on crime, as I am. We're not as ultra lenient as some of the Nordic states, for example. So, all in all, we're far from the worst situation in the world or even in Europe, I would say. So, that has to be considered. I think that the press have to report positive trends where they do exist because fear of crime may be disproportionate to what actual crime levels are. I feel very strongly about this subject, but that doesn't mean I think that crime is absolutely skyrocketing high. I just think that when it does happen, there needs to be tougher penalties, particularly for career offenders. But if you get a trend, for example, I mean, newspapers should be shouting out these statistics to reassure the people of Barnsley and Hemel Hempstead and the City of London you know. But I do think there's a cynical side to the press where, a gory story about someone being brutally murdered will sell more than that, unfortunately. So the press and the media do have a responsibility to report positive trends with crime as well. I think that's very important for the psychology of the public. Um, but I absolutely demand, as a citizen, that career criminals are punished sufficiently, that they're put behind bars to keep the public safe. Please, please, please sign the petition. And thanks for listening.